Today is Rishi Sunak's 100th day as Prime Minister, in the same week as Super Strike Day, the biggest day of industrial action in a decade, and Britain being the only G7 economy forecast to shrink by the IMF. So that gives you an idea of the socio-economic picture that Rishi Sunak is facing. But he has a few problems closer to home as well. He's had to sack his party chair, Nadhim Zahawi. We spoke about that a bit last week. And there are questions hanging over his Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. Freddie, you wrote about this in Morning Call, didn't you? His first 100 days. Tell us where we are in general, and then we'll go into the detail.
Well, I think it's gone really badly for Rishi Sunak, to be honest. You've got to remember what he was promising when he came in. He said he was going to reinvigorate the Tory Party. He was going to have a fresh face compared to Johnson and Truss, and he's not been able to do that. The problems that sort of brought down Truss and Johnson, he's inherited. He's not been able to bring the party together, and we're seeing the consequences of that week on week. Zahawi's the latest one.
And has he really inherited them, or does it say something about the wisdom of his choices of the people he put into his cabinet?
Certainly there's only one person who appointed the current cabinet, and that is the current Prime Minister. You can't get away from that. And he had a difficult choice because bringing the party together does mean including voices and names of people who were associated with both Johnson and Truss. He can't completely exclude all of those people because he wouldn't have a parliamentary majority if he did. Nonetheless, he brought Suella Braverman in, he brought Nadhim Zahawi in, and he brought Dominic Raab in, Dominic as the number 2 Deputy Prime Minister. And the latest allegations are about Dominic Raab's allegedly bullying behaviour. And he is clearly, he's always been a slightly intemperate, impatient man. I think in his defence, he doesn't just punch down, he punches sideways. And when the mood takes him, he punches upwards as well. He's a punchy kind of guy. I think this is a very, very hard one for Rishi Sunak because with Nadhim Zahawi, it was pretty clear there was a financial issue there about his relationship with the HMRC and what he said and didn't say at the time. And it was sort of pretty cut and dried. Nadhim Zahawi doesn't think so, but everybody else does. But this time it's a bit harder because, in a sense, he has to judge whether somebody with Dominic Raab's temperament and personality should be allowed to be at the top of politics. Now, Dominic Raab doesn't have a huge bunch of great friends hanging around in Westminster, though he's in the tea room a lot making new friends. But I think he would be a dangerous figure to remove from the cabinet and put onto the backbenches at this moment. And this is an absolutely classic case of what Freddie was saying about the problems that Rishi Sunak has. He's got to think the whole time about his backbenches, and his backbenches now want radically different things, which is why from time to time he seems a little bit frozen. We complain endlessly that he doesn't have the big vision, the excitement about where he's taking the country, but that is for a very good reason.
Yes, because there's not just threats from the people within his cabinet, but also from the backbenchers as well. Andrew, you've written about the trussies, I think you called them, preparing to go public, admitting their mistakes, and how they rushed their policies into being and had that terrible downfall, but insisting the growth policy was actually right. Well,
Liz Truss is charging around Westminster with a fixed smile on her face, looking very perky, and she's been talking to right-wing American groups. And, you see people like Kwasi Kwarteng back again talking to people. Now, I'm not saying there is, as it were, a plot to bring back Truss economics, because what Conor Burns told me this week were the toxic 45 days which nearly destroyed the Tory party is still in recent memory. So that's not going to happen. But I think this idea of a growth agenda and why are we not getting the growth, we'll come on to the IMF report, I'm sure, is something that's being talked about an awful lot. And you can just see the sort of swirlings of kind of unhelpful noise all around Sunak. You've got the main Eurosceptics gathering together saying that he absolutely must push the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill through the House of Lords. One of them saying, if he doesn't do that, we should abolish the House of Lords. This is a revolution. The language is quite hardcore. And that he must cut taxes in the March budget. And then you've got plenty of other people saying that would be absolutely mad. I was just saying I was talking to Conor Burns, who was Boris Johnson's eyes and ears on Northern Ireland. And Conor Burns told me that if the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill went through, which effectively allows the government to demolish the Northern Ireland Protocol when it wants to, if that went through, then Sinn Féin would not take part in any power-sharing agreement. So if they don't get the bill through, the DUP destroy power-sharing. If they do, Sinn Féin destroys power-sharing. They're in a real bind over this. And that's just one example of the problems that are now beginning to build up.
And Boris Johnson as well, the former Prime Minister, is also causing trouble.
Yeah, he is. And I think they had very different tactics in government. Boris Johnson would take lots of risks. He would be very brash about what he wanted to achieve. And Rishi Sunak's support sort of gone the other way. He's been very risk-averse, I think. He's said that he wants to manage government as it is. He's adopted 5 priorities, which are basically just a restatement of the normal duties of government. And I think lots of people were expecting something else to come after that. We sort of thought he would deal with the fallout from the mini-budget, try and calm things down, soothe the financial markets, and then we'd get an idea of what Sunakism is. That hasn't come, and I don't think it will come. I was speaking to one cabinet minister this week, and they're basically saying, no, Rishi Sunak's all about good government. That's what he wants to do in these last 18 months. And the problem for him is that it creates a vacuum, and these right-wing trussies, as Andrew terms them, fill that with calls and clamours for tax cuts.
Does that mean there could be a rebellion on the budget then if they don't introduce those tax cuts that they want to have so much earlier than the general election?
I'd be surprised if there's a substantial rebellion yet, because I think the memory of the Truss period is still very fresh, and I think we are still in the honeymoon period, really, for Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt. There may be a small rebellion, and there will certainly be a lot of protests, but I don't see large numbers of Tories trying to vote down the budget. That would bring a general election, and that's not what they want. But I really agree with everything that Freddie said there, I have to say, because I think historians might look back at Rishi Sunak and say here was a very intelligent, focused, quite ethically moral guy who came into power rather inexperienced as a prime minister, very inexperienced in politics, really, at a time when it was actually objectively impossible to be a successful prime minister.
Yeah, I think the inexperience point is very interesting. I was speaking to another Tory MP this week, and they were basically highlighting that Sunak hasn't got much political experience. He only came in 2015. And often, what was Churchill had about 20 years before he finally got into government? You have that time to build up your sort of key issues, your thoughts. And all that he had was a pamphlet on free ports, I think it was, which has been written about since the 80s anyway. So he hasn't got that sort of bank of ideas to grasp on as he goes into government. Hence, he's reverted to that managerial way of doing things.
I don't think we talk enough about the skills that you need to be a top politician because they're real. It's a very, very difficult job, and it's just the thing. It's the things that Freddie was talking about in terms of having the bank of ideas, having a philosophy, having a direction. That's absolutely essential. But also the kind of wiliness, the ability to manipulate people around you to get where you want, the ability to hold groups together, even if they don't really agree internally, and bring them forward. All those kind of rather sophisticated, you might say slightly sort of shabby people skills that politicians really need. And so far, I don't think Rishi Sunak has.
Well, I think it showed that he was lacking that nous and that sort of street smarts when he promised that he'd bring accountability, professionalism and integrity into politics. Those people who have been around a long time, like you were saying, Freddie, they know all the skeletons in people's closets. They know the rumours in Westminster, and they know when they would be most expedient to come out. He showed his naivety there.
And I come back again and again to this theme of, is it possible to be too rich in politics? Because on the one hand, we've got all the problems that Boris Johnson has got into, cadging loans and trying to accumulate more and more spending money and getting into trouble with that. But then if you're Rishi Sunak and you don't need to do that because you are so hugely rich, are you out of touch with normal experience? And there are journalists around Westminster already ferreting their way into his family finances.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on that.
I'm sure we will.
Thanks so much for watching. And if you want to ask us a question for You Ask Us, you can put one in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And you can watch more episodes of the New Statesman podcast and other videos in our feed.